Good evening. I'd like to call the meeting to order, Special Committee on Health, Opportunity, Prosperity, and Education, open on this vote. Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Chairman Juan Machado,
Present.
Vice Chairwoman Shelley Peterson is not here. Councilor Sue Annabelle. Present. Councilor Justin Reyes is not here. Councilor Miguel Sanchez.
Here.
You have 3 present, 2 absent, you have a quorum.
Thank you very much. I also would like to welcome and recognize Chairwoman Helen Anthony. Thank you for being here. And also Chairman Jonathan Klaus. Thank you for also joining us today. We also have from the Law Department, Steve Nelson. Thanks for being here. Today we're going to hear from our esteemed colleague who has been a Providence resident for the longest time. I think he was born here from. Yes, he was. But I had the pleasure of also meeting him when he was in the school committee as a school member, and then the city council and now a state senator on the important issue of education, but also more importantly the commission that he led, and now he's here before us to provide and speak to us regarding the recommendations and his findings and then recommendations. And also with that, I also would like to welcome to our city hall Susan Lucy, who was the former superintendent of the Providence Public School District, which again is a stranger to many of us in the city, and also for those of us who continue to have our kids in the public school system. And of course, we also have Steve Smith, who was a teacher, former state representative, and a leader in education and president of the teachers union, and now working with us as a consulting in education. So welcome to our guests and the speakers, and to many of you who are here. And I can go on, but we want to make sure that we go into it right away. Members, we have a couple of items that before, just in case, I know that Councilwoman Sue Andua has to leave us most likely closer to 6:30. But just in case, I just want to make sure that we take a couple of things for as to enter items to enter into the exhibition for discussion. So the first one that I would like to have before us is we'll entertain a motion to enter Exhibit 2, which is the PowerPoint presentation from Senator Sansouria. So move the motion. Second. There is a motion and a second. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Aye. The motion passes. It is entered into Exhibit number 2. The other item is Exhibit number 3, which is a letter from the Mayor of Providence. Is there a motion? So here, the motion has been moved and seconded. All those in favor? Aye. Any the motion passes. So that's the letter from the mayor. And then the motion to number 4, which is the report, which is the Special Senate Legislative Commission to review and provide recommendations for professional and labor management standards that provide school-based flexibility and accountability for employees of Providence Public Schools by the Rhode Island State Senate Senator Sansouria. Is there a motion? So moved. Second. There is a motion and a second. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Aye. The motion passes. And then the last thing that I would like to have is also this is just for if there's any reference or just discussion, but there will be no vote taken today. So I will entertain a motion to amend the agenda to have a discussion regarding a resolution that was presented. And off the docket at the December 5th council meeting. And for the record, we can only discuss this resolution and we cannot take a vote. Is there a motion? Second. There is a motion and a second. Any discussion? Seeing none, the motion has been passed and the agenda has been amended. And Madam Clerk, can you read the item into the record, which
Resolution in support of the recommendation from the Special Senate Commission to review and provide recommendation for professional and labor management standards that offer school-based flexibility.
excuse me for a second. Is there a motion to waive the reading of the resolution?
So moved.
Is there a second? The motion has been moved and seconded. Any discussion? Just for discussion, sake, we're gonna,
Yeah.
we'll have it online, but also you will reference it, and so therefore, we're going to move forward, right? So the motion has been made and seconded, and if no further discussion, the motion has been adopted. Thank you very much. So with that said, we're gonna get into the presentation. The first person that I would like to invite is Senator Sam Zuri. Welcome, and welcome to your familiar place here in City Hall. We appreciate all that you do and a voice for Providence since the beginning. Born and went to classical and really took public service into very serious, and it is an honor to have you back and present before us. You may begin.
Yeah, and just for the benefit, thank you, commission, committee members, and also other council members. So coming on Monday night, I'm sure there are lots of other things you have to do. And it's nice to be here. Chair Petrarca and I actually go back to the early 2000s when he was a president, he was a parent, and I was on the school board. And that's when I first saw the quality of his advocacy, both for his kids and for the Providence public schools. And he's obviously had a distinguished career. So since then, it was a privilege getting to know him then, and it's a privilege coming back here. We're going to talk tonight about public education, and we all know the importance of public education, our Providence public schools. I think many of us would agree that after public safety, public education is the second most important mission of our local government. And I think if you ask any parent, they would say after the health of their children, what's most important to them is their child's education. It's very, very important. So, I'm going to spend, I'm hoping, like 6 or 7 minutes talking about how the commission was set up and how it did its job. And then Sue Lucy is going to come up and go through the PowerPoint to talk about the education policy behind the commission's work.
Thank you.
I would start by saying that our Providence public schools provide a quality public education to hundreds of people every year. I personally am very grateful for that because of my father. He got a quality public education many, many years ago. He grew up in poverty, and he was able to develop successful careers in attorney. My mother was a teacher in the Providence public schools. My siblings and I got a quality public education, prepared us very well for college. My kids went to the Providence public school, and they got very well prepared. But with that said, my family and my kids had certain advantages that most kids in Providence didn't have. I grew up in a middle-class family. My parents provided me with supports and supplements that aren't available to most kids in Providence public school. And the same thing with what Lauren and I were able to provide our children. And even though hundreds of kids are getting a quality public education in Providence every year, there are thousands that are not. And your ability to get a quality public education in Providence should not depend upon your family's socioeconomic status. Now, there are many reasons why our kids don't get a quality, or the majority of kids in Providence don't get a quality public education, beginning with socioeconomic factors. It's hard when kids aren't getting the support at home that they need. But that shouldn't be a barrier to their getting a quality public education. That's something that's hard for us to control at the local level. Similarly, the Providence Public Schools don't get enough resources from the state. This is a big battle I've been working on for years. At one point as a lawyer, I sued the state and said, you should give more money to urban schools. But that's again, something that we don't have control of at the local level. And the challenge was, in the Senate, what is it that we can control? What is it that we can do, even as these socioeconomic factors, even as this inadequate state aid looms over us? In the winter of 2022, Steve Smith and Susan Lucy put forward an opinion piece about this. Now, they had worked together. Steve had been the president of the Providence Teachers Union for many years, up into the early 2000s. Sue was the superintendent of the Providence Public Schools in the early 2010s. They were working together towards improvements in labor management relations, site-based management, professional standards, and they weren't able to get it finished before they both left. But they had ideas which unfortunately were not carried out after they left. They put them in an opinion piece. And I read that, I said, this is something we should be able to work on. I went to Senate leadership, I said, can we have a study commission work on this? They said yes. And the study commission started going to work in 2023. The commission's charge was professional labor management standards, school-based flexibility and accountability. These are things that we can control even as we don't have the budget that we want, even as we can't control kids' socioeconomic background. We formed a 15-member commission. It included state senators. It included educators. There was a Providence teacher, a principal, Providence central office, a representative from Rhode Island Federation of Teachers, a representative from the State Department of Education. We had local representatives, including Councilman Boyce, who not only brought the city council perspective, but also he was a second educator. Who was very lucky to have. He did a great job. We also had someone from the school board. We had someone from the mayor's office. We had a parent. We had a student. And then Sue and Steve were also non-voting members. The commission held 15 meetings. 3 were for public engagement. 3 were for presentations from experts. And then we had 9 meetings to work on this report. We went through like 6 drafts. Ultimately, it was approved by a vote of 10-1. The report, and again, this was Sue's job to work through the details, was recommendations, and the theme was shared accountability. We wanted for our teachers to be free, to have more autonomy, the ability to craft their classroom instruction and the needs of the kids in front of them, and not to be micromanaged to the minute by the administration. But we also felt that as part of that, there should be shared accountability, and that teachers understand that they were professionals and they had responsibility for the outcomes that result of their tasks. This is a model, and you will hear that American Federation of Teachers has been advocating for a while. It's worked in other school districts. We need to bring it to Providence. So that's you'll hear more from Sue about the education policy behind this. But why are we here? Why are we asking for your support? Well, as you know, the state took over the Providence Public Schools in 2019. In those days, I was a private citizen, and I was not excited about the takeover. And I see Councilwoman Anderson here. I was a pro bono attorney, and she had concerns, as did Councilwoman Miller and Kat Cronin, and she was the third one. And so they were concerned. They said, this isn't going to work. There are benchmarks, there's no accountability. Those arguments didn't work. The state took over. And then at that point, I switched. I said, okay, the state is taking it over. It's got to do the best it can and improve the schools before they return to Providence. So that's what the state promised to do. And so far, they've had some improvements, but it's not enough. And as a Providence resident, I want to see the state takeover succeed further before it comes back to Providence. And I also think that even Providence, local other should be developing a plan for a successful return to local control. We know that local control is gonna happen in the next 2 to 3 years. We don't have a plan right now. And we submit that our study commission offers a plan that, that would help Providence Public Schools for the transition back to local control. We'd like for you to consider it. We're hoping you'll get your support because it's going to involve legislation up at the State House. And get that legislation enacted, we will need your help. So that's my introduction. And we look forward to answering your questions. But now I'd like to turn the floor over to Sue Lucy, who will walk you through our presentation about the education policy in our commission report.
Thank you, Senator, and before we take any questions, if you have any questions,
Oh, yeah.
we want to wait for the end, however, I'm open to that. I would like to recognize the as President Rachel Miller. As you heard, very passionate about education too, also Councilwoman and Vice Chair Shelley Peterson. Thank you for being here. Any questions for the Senator? Thank you, Senator. Superintendent? Susan Lucy? And if you can just also speak up as one.
Use
we're
a
recording it.
cafeteria voice.
Yeah.
Yes. I know that those who might be watching at home, or will go back and watch it just to make sure that the audio is very sharp and clear.
Okay.
And then also for those of us who are a little bit hard of hearing.
Okay,
Thank you and welcome.
thank you so much. I'm sorry, I'm experiencing technical.
And along also with Steve Smith, who also would be speaking right after or together. So welcome,
Together.
Steve.
We'll work together. I apologize, this was working very well. Of course, I got here, okay. I'm so pleased to be with you all. Thank you for the invitation. I've known some of you for quite some time, and Council President, I haven't had the opportunity to meet you or the Vice Chair, so thank you very much. I want to thank my colleagues, Senator Zurier and Steve Smith, for all the work on this. And as Senator Zurier said, so Steve and I worked together somewhat earlier when I was also chief of staff for the school district when Mayor Cianci was mayor for part of that time, and then as Mayor Cicilline was coming in, and then I was superintendent in another district, and then returned to Providence as superintendent. So Steve and I knew one another prior to me coming back as superintendent, and we did, as Senator Zurier said, worked very hard together. And that was a time, just as a reminder, I came back as superintendent when 5 schools had been closed and every teacher had been fired, as was said. And Steve and I'm going to just tell this story really quickly. We met for a martini at Parkside before I had even started. And Steve said, congratulations, we all think you belong in Butler. And I'm going to get this contract done and I'm going to get out of here as quickly as possible. Meaning out of Providence. And I said, lovely to see you again. And, you know, let's try to work together. So we did work extremely hard under very challenging circumstances to really have teachers and administration work together. And we got, and Steve's very eloquent about this, but if I let him get started, we'll be here all night. So we're gonna hold on for a minute. We got a lot of accolades for that on the one hand, but as Steve said, you know, why do you need like body armor and security to actually talk with your superintendent? And why similarly, like it's not, when you go to superintendent school, quote unquote, there's not a lot of emphasis on collaboration. And yet, while the name for this study commission and that long charge is, it's a little bit insomnia inducing, with all due respect to all of us who worked on this. The reason this is so important is there's actually research that says not only is it crucially important to have quality individual teachers, it's crucially important for them to work together. And if you think of a medical analogy, that's not so hard to understand, right? If any of you have had the misfortune yourselves or with a loved one to have someone who's very ill and working with a group of doctors, if they don't talk with one another, bad things can happen. And if they do talk with one another, many more positive things happen. And the same is true in schools. Teaching is really a team activity. And I'm going to keep returning to that because it seems so obvious. And yet what Steve and I were pointing out in this opinion piece we wrote 2 years ago was even starting with state legislation, the system is set up for labor and management to be at odds with one another. And so that, in a nutshell, is what we're trying to change. And unlike Senator Zurier and I guess Councilwoman Anthony, I actually supported the takeover initially. I was interviewed for the Hopkins report and I was asked, did I think some kind of state intervention would be helpful? And I said, it might be, because I didn't see, after the many, many years, starting with the probe report back in the 1990s, I did not see what was going to change the fundamental conditions in the school district to lead to real improvement, despite many, I mean, I know personally, there are many, many high quality educators in Providence. And the system as a whole has not served either kids or teachers or families particularly well for many, many years. So I was supportive of the takeover, but I actually called the person who interviewed me back and I said, but if a takeover just increases the layers that have to be gone through for decisions to be made in the schools, then it will not work. I said, you know, I talked to you about the need to reduce layers, even in the existing city system. And if a state takeover just replaces what the layers are, or even increases them, it is not going to help kids. And I think, unfortunately, in many ways, that's what's happened. I'm going to turn to the PowerPoint here. My goodness. Sorry, folks.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, this kind of technology gets done.
You know, I always think I'm better at this than I end up being. So if you've got some slides that Senator Zurier really actually already talked you through. So slide 2 and 3, and then slide 4 has the commission's charge. And again, in a nutshell, this is about trying to fundamentally change the conditions so that adults work better together on behalf of students. You see on slide 5, a number, we had really the privilege of hearing from a number of experts over the 3 hearings of testimony. And just to give a little more background, Joe Anderson, for example, he is the founder of the Consortium for Educational Change. He was also an advisor to Arnie Duncan when he was Secretary of Education. He's also someone who throughout his career worked on labor management collaboration from the union side of the house. So he worked with me and Steve when we were trying to work together here in Providence.
He was the president also in Illinois.
Yes.
Yeah.
Heather Pesky, the National Council on Teacher Quality, that organization has for years studied a whole number of aspects in policy about what leads to quality teachers. Nancy Mullen, some of you may know, she was principal here in Providence for a number of years at Mount Pleasant and elsewhere, and then also in Massachusetts. Paul Revel is now at Harvard. He was also the first Secretary of Education in Massachusetts, and he was very instrumental in the 1993 education reforms that are really seen as being pivotal in education improvement in that state. Evan Stone, Educators for Excellence, is a teacher-led organization that ensures teachers have a leading voice in policies that influence students and their profession. And they are really very strongly pro-union, and also think unions need to work differently with regard to education. John Kay is at the Annenberg Institute for School Reform here in Providence. Peter McWalters, many of you may know, was commissioner for many years here in Rhode Island. Andres Alonso, the reason his work in Baltimore is important, he was CEO of Baltimore Public Schools when they negotiated what was really a breakthrough contract that gave more school site control, changed the way teachers were paid, etc. So he was very informative. And then Saul Rubenstein is a researcher at Rutgers who has again studied labor management for collaboration for many years. He's consulted very often with the AFT, the American Federation of Teachers. He also came to Providence again when all of us were working together. Moving to slide 6. I'm going to talk a little more about the work of the commission and the commission's recommendations. And just again, building on something Senator Zurier said, we all recognize that right now the city doesn't control Providence schools, but your roles as leaders and as a voice for changes that need to be made in the system are fundamentally crucial, both in terms of giving voice to people in the legislature, but also talking with your constituents and hearing from them, and also working with them around these ideas as well as others. So I'm on slide 7. The commission really started talking about what is the vision for what we would like to see in Providence schools. And you see the elements of that vision here. Excellent education for every student. Schools that attract and retain high quality, diverse teachers and other educators. Educators who work together to educate students well. Again, that great teachers working together. Teachers having meaningful participation in decision making. So often teachers feel very disempowered over some of the really fundamental elements of their work. And we heard some of that in the testimony. And then at the same time, teachers are responsible for maintaining high standards within their profession. And unfortunately, that seems, this vision, while I think this vision, I find this vision very compelling, and I don't think that's where Providence is today. We hear a lot in the press and elsewhere about teachers and administrators leaving the system. There does appear to be continued acrimony between labor and management. The School Works report that the state recently commissioned talked about the views of the central office are reading worse than ever when you interview people in the schools, etc. So So again, this report is built around the concept of shared accountability. And, that is teachers working together. Sorry, I'm on slide 8 now. Teachers working together, to improve student learning. And what that means is sharing best practices and data, offering informed insights and learning from one another. So again, going back to the research, we all know there are brand new teachers every year in a school system. But if a brand new teacher is in an environment, a school, in which they have the time and really the expectation to collaborate with other more senior teachers, then that teacher's expertise grows much more quickly. And similarly, the expertise across teachers grows much more quickly. So in Providence, it's a complex job in Providence. It's a complex job to teach anywhere. And I used to think about it because I was also superintendent in Portsmouth, Rhode Island, which is very different in terms of communities. I used to think about it like degrees of difficulty in diving. So I'm not a diver, just for the record. But you know, if you watch Olympic diving, there are people, everybody dives, but some dives are harder than others. And you get points for degree of difficulty. And I always thought in the state's accountability system, you should get points because students who come in, you know, there are more students. Students who live in poverty often have fewer opportunities, as Senator Zurier said, despite having families who are enormously invested in their students and want to help their students in every way possible. They are often families who also have multiple jobs, who may not have any familiarity with the American education system, who may have a language barrier that the school system is not good enough at taking steps to kind of bridge the communication divide. So it is even more important in a system like Providence that educators are working together on behalf of kids. So how do we get there in Providence? I'm now on slide 10, great work. We're in the right place. So the commission really came up with 4 recommendations. And one, and I'll go through each of these, but one, and some of these, again, going back to Senator Zurier's points, some of these are things that can happen legislatively, and some of these are things that really have to happen on the local level. So first, negotiate a teacher's contract that requires shared accountability. And I'll talk more about what that means. And I think even though I recognize that no one at this table is party to negotiating the contract, you all at this table can ask really good questions about the contract that emerges. Second recommendation was provide support and training. Third was to amend state law to remove legislative barriers, and I'll go into more detail on that. And then finally, to hold administrators accountable for collaborative decision making. So in the, starting on the teacher contract piece, these are some look-fors. If we were really trying to change conditions for adults to work together better on behalf of kids. One, decision-making at the school level, and an approach to putting it in place. So an example that's cited in the report is the Springfield Empowerment Zone. And there's a little more on that in the PowerPoint, but they put, for example, teacher leadership teams in every one of their buildings. Steve and I were working on something similar with a leadership team at each school that was co-chaired by the principal and the building delegate. from the union. School level accountability for continuous improvement, so every school has a school improvement plan. What are we seeing in terms of the continuous improvement? School level control of professional development, so teachers really having a very substantial set of decision making around what kind of training do I most need to help kids. Differentiated teacher responsibilities and compensation. So again, going back, there are models where if you have a star teacher who's more experienced, why do we still in schools in general put one teacher in every classroom and she or he works with their 25 or so kids and doesn't work with the other teachers? So there are ways of organizing schools so that master teachers are working with multiple teachers as well as some kids, so that again, teachers are profiting from the expertise of others. And Steve and I were trying to change the compensation system as well. And then shared accountability for supporting teachers who aren't performing and dismissing those who don't improve after support with expedited dismissal, which we also worked on. The empowerment zone, I'm not going to go through this in as much detail, but their contract highlights some of the very things the commission recommended, such as the joint commitment to collaboration, a career ladder, streamlined dispute process, etc. And I think slide 13 is important in that it just shows some of the results from the empowerment zone. And the empowerment zone came about because Springfield schools in Massachusetts they were under the threat of takeover, state takeover. And instead, what the administration and the community agreed to do in Springfield was they picked a zone of schools, starting out with all the middle schools or almost all. Now they have some high schools as well, but they created a very different teacher contract and way of working within those schools. And you see graduation rates have improved markedly. There are many more teachers and school leaders of color. We see decreased suspensions, improved attendance, and importantly, 69% of parents said they wouldn't change their student's school if given the opportunity, and 96% of teachers ratified the most recent contract. Around support and training. If we, to make the changes that the types of changes we're talking about here, we do need help training. People don't necessarily know how to work together. We in Providence, you look like this. You're saying no kidding. When Steve and I were trying to do this work, we had regular meetings of principals and building delegates together. So the traditional model is the superintendent meets with principals or the superintendent and district staff, and the union president and the executive board, they meet with the building delegates. And it's, my words, a little bit like a game of telephone, you know, we're telling the principals something, Steve and his colleagues are telling the union delegates something, and maybe not, it meshes when we get to the building. So we had meetings and really professional development for both sets of parties around how to work together around these teams. collaborative dispute resolution. So rather than just immediately filing a grievance and then you go through all these steps, the goal was as much as possible to resolve issues at the school level. But starting with the building delegate, Steve used to say to building delegates, no, you should actually go talk to the principal before there's a problem, right?
I was admonished for that early on, and so I'm encouraging my building delegates to speak to the principal, and my union leader said, that's the wrong move.
What are you doing?
You're the voice of the union. I said, you think I'm gonna talk to 52 principals on a regular basis? You're crazy. But that was the model.
And similarly, there were people in administration who thought I spent much too much time with the union president. And try to get people to work with you. So there also needs to be time for that planning and collaboration and professional development. People love to compare test scores of US kids to test scores of kids from other countries, and usually say, we're not doing well enough. What's also true when you look at the countries that are most successful is there is much more collaboration and there is much more time for collaboration. So teachers have substantial parts of their day. The school day may well be longer, but they're not spending all of their time in front of kids so that they have that time to work together, to plan lessons, to say, you know, Sue does really well in your class, but not so well in mine. How is that? And to really talk about that. And then finally, time for working with families and community. We know how important parental family support is. And if we don't have that communication between schools and families, that can happen. Okay, so state law. I will try to wrap this up. I realize I've been talking longer than.
Okay, we might have a lot of questions.
Okay. The commission recommended changes to 4 state laws. We also had been hopeful that there might be an opportunity to have a constitutional amendment to create the legally enforceable right to education, but that, as we know, did not occur. And we're not having a constitutional convention. But teacher layoffs, so Rhode Island, so 60 and 13.6 is regarding teacher layoffs due to declining enrollment. And it says, it basically says you can only use seniority in that. And we think there should be, and we are one of the few states that there's legislation that says layoffs should only be based on seniority. So we want to change the law so that more criteria can be taken into account. It also, Providence has been successful in attracting more teachers of color over the past few years, but often if you do last in, first out in terms of layoffs. So based on seniority, your newest teachers are the ones you lose. So it's heading toward potentially losing some of the very people the system most wanted to attract. Expediting due process when union and management agree performance is unacceptable. So Steve and I again worked on something that the AFT has long supported called peer assistance and review. And there was a committee, a labor management joint committee, co-chaired by a high-level administrator in the district and by the then vice president of the Providence Teachers Union, Mary Beth Calabro. And that group of teachers, those expert peer assistance and review teachers, provided support to teachers who were not performing well. And they often were successful in helping that teacher get on the path to success. And sometimes they were not. And we had instances where the panel as a whole agreed this teacher has not improved. Despite all the support. But because of the way state law is currently written around due process, we started all over again in terms of the hearing process. So even though we had agreed, we had this joint process, at the end of the day, Steve and his colleagues felt, or were advised that legally, if they didn't go through all these due process steps, they could be sued. So there are other states where there is expedited due process in these instances. And that, do you want to add anything?
No, I think just that by state law, and I would, I would sometimes be at parent meetings. And I would be accused of representing bad teachers, and I say, well, I represent all of them, some of them happen to be bad. But I don't have, it's not like there's a choice. And I would spend, the union would spend members' dues upwards, if we went through the whole process. I'm going back 10 years, $50,000. Representing someone that it was clear, as Sue mentioned, shouldn't be in front of kids. But it wasn't, there's no choice. I'm not saying, and I think this is, a positive move for the union. Everyone should have, you just shouldn't lose your job arbitrarily, but you should have a hearing, one hearing. And the evidence is presented and the supports were given, this is what didn't work out, and this is why. And then there were some egregious cases that I won't get into, that we still had to go through that process.
The third one, 16,729, is about allowing the negotiation of a career ladder that rewards teachers for taking on additional responsibilities. And this law, the current law mandates steps. It says, I believe, no fewer than 10, no more than 12. And that a teacher goes up a step for each year of service. And what we were trying to do was say, some teachers might actually accelerate faster because they're taking on more responsibility and have quality performance, or at least, acceptable performance. And then teachers who, say a teacher is being, is being supported by one of these PAR teachers, they should not automatically get a step increase if their practice is not at least, acceptable. And so the problem, we realized if we had passed the contract we were trying to negotiate, we would have had to change state law to actually implement. And then finally, the Crowley Act. And this is, I think it's pretty clear in the commission report. This is not where we would start in terms of the Crowley Act. But if you get to the point where people cannot and will not work together, and we can't change the system around that, there needs to be, when there is an intervention, people need to be able to make some changes. And so when you look at the receivership law in Massachusetts, for example, it very clearly enumerates the powers and duties of the receiver, which are all of the powers and duties of the superintendent and of the school board. And then it specifically says up to and including interrupting teacher or labor contracts. Again, that's not, I think our strong preference is to build these, change these conditions so that there is collaboration. But it also was the case both in Springfield with the empowerment zone and in Baltimore when they negotiated their breakthrough contract, that it was the threat of intervention that led to these changes. And yet now, as I said, in the empowerment zone, teachers are very, very supportive of the contract they have, but it took kind of that, unfortunately, that threat to induce a real change. The last but very important recommendation of the commission is to hold administrators accountable for collaborative decision making. And teachers and union members rightfully say, administrators aren't necessarily good at collaborating either. And so it has to be a two-way street in terms of training and also the expectations and administrator evaluations for that collaboration. And I'm just closing with this, the quote here in green that's on your slides, on slide 17, is from Peter McWalters. And he said, the system was never set up to serve all kids. It has very, very reliably serviced about 30%, no matter what we do. And then another 40% get through it. And about 30% don't do very well. And that percentage rises to 50%, the percentage of kids who don't do well, if you're in a targeted population. And that he said, that's not a new number. We've known this. He doesn't mean just in Providence, but around the country. We've been doing that consistently, and we're still doing it. So change is always, always hard. At some level, sometimes it's easier to just keep doing the same thing, but we know we're losing countless students in Providence each and every year. And so we are very hopeful that you will help us make change.
Thank you, Ms. Lucy and Senator Sansoria and my very own Steve Smith for being here, but also that presentation. As the senator indicated, and I know Senator Councilwoman Underwood is going to be leaving soon. I'll give her a chance to ask questions before you leave, and then I'll say a few words myself, and then open it up to the rest of the members.
Sure, thank you, Chairman, and I apologize, thank you so much for this presentation. I had a community meeting scheduled for the same night, and it was like impossible to reschedule, but I'll watch the remainder of this on the Zoom afterward, and just really appreciate your time and this amazing work in the report. So thank you, Senator, and thank you, Steve, and former superintendent. This is really fantastic.
Thank you.
Thank you so
And,
much.
Do you have a question you want to ask?
There's no burning
No
question.
burning-
Yeah, I really appreciate this, though.
That's no problem.
Okay.
Yeah,
Thank you.
and just also for everybody, there will be public comment. We want to get some feedback from the people that are here. And also feel free to send us some commentary or letters to this committee, because I think our mission of this committee is to continue to have this dialogue and get more information on how to and best practices to improve our education system in Providence. As Senator Sansoria indicated, and Dr. Sulusi and I have known each other and Steve for the longest time. Back then, as a younger student at the college, and also a young father, and with many family members in the school system, oftentimes we go to the school board and yell at you guys. And say, you gotta hear the parents' voice, you gotta hear, and oftentimes would comment in the sense that the community, we always felt that we were in the middle. And we were like this Atari game, that it was like a ping pong game. And as you mentioned, how complicated it has been, and it continues to be, to get adults to cooperate and really close that achievement gap at many levels, but in this perspective is the education gap. And I'm reminded of how, in essence, this the Monopoly game, which Hasbro creates here, it's like a Monopoly game of education. In the past 30 years that I've experienced, and still, I'm just honored and also privileged to be at the table now to see how we can make those changes. I know that Dr. McWalters, and heard it very clear 20-some years ago, said that formula. And so in essence, what they were telling us as a community was that we know that 30% of you are going to fail right from the beginning. As soon as you start school, we know that 30%. If you make it out, some of that's left over 50%. And so a lot of us did not have hope. But we continue to be advocates, and that's how I got involved in politics. Now, we get to have an opportunity, and I was one of those that supported the takeover. Because even being in the Senate, we had an education summit for many years in the Senate, while the senator was a councilman and so forth. We have many speakers. We hear the same message of how to change our schools, what we needed. But one of the things for me that why I supported so more so afterwards, concluding that states should take over the schools, was because, as you indicated also, we weren't receiving enough funding, adequate funding for the population that you were serving. Therefore, not paying enough for teachers that at a certain point were paid better than what they used to be, but also just the resources among the students. So my question to you, if Senator or Dr. Lucy, is your feeling, or at least the report, or through the conversation, was not just only the law of the Crowley Act addressed, but was there any specific dollar amount that in order to serve, to undo that formula that Dr. McWalters is quoted, and we all can agree that that's an accurate code. Because if we look back 30 years, how many of those students every year have dropped out, have not graduated high school, or even made it out to college, or cannot even read? Was that at any point addressed through the hearings in terms of dollar amount to be able to support your recommendations?
Yeah, thank you for the question, and that was one of the major impediments we saw towards complete fulfillment of the mission of the Providence Public Schools. We also, in my remarks, I noted, to overcome the socioeconomic factors of kids and inadequate resources for the Providence Public Schools. And I had to kind of run herd over the commission, because they said, well, what about those things? And I said, well, that's a great topic, but we got this very limited charge from the Senate. The Senate said, we want to hear from you about labor management standards, site-based management, professional accountability. That other stuff gets off the table. So when we wrote the report, we had a whole section, and we called it humility. We're not saying that these reforms are sufficient to solve all the problems in Providence. That's why I was in this small minority. It turned out that one of the Constitutional Convention, we wanted to have a judge decide, because I thought, even though I'm an elected state legislator, that we as state legislators weren't making the right decision. It happens that the Senate has actually passed a resolution for the last 3 years, at least, for a constitutional right to education. It's been stopped in the House because, according to reports, the Speaker doesn't like the financial implications of giving Providence kids the resources they need. So the answer to your question, I think, is yes, we need a lot more money in Providence. That's something that I'm working my tushy on, but we can't control the local level. This is something we can control at the local level, and it's not sufficient, but we have submitted it's necessary.
Thank you. Councilwoman.
I would just ask, though, even if we did have the funding, the sufficient funding in place, I mean, without the changes that you're proposing, the recommendations that you're making, I mean, even if we had enough money, we still,
It's necessary.
our students would still not receive the quality education that they need to receive, even if we were fully funded, if we don't make these other changes. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's necessary.
This is like the puzzle. This is one of the pieces of the puzzle that we need to get to. Thank you. Councilman Goldcast?
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, and I say this as an educator who has kind of an interesting experience having been a Providence public school student. So K through 8, I went to Barton Gregorian, Nathaniel Green, went to Providence Public School. Then I transitioned from 9 through 12 to Wheeler. Went to Brown for undergrad and grad school. I have a master's in education. So I'm like in the weeds, very nuanced when it comes to this stuff. What can we do in the interim? There's all this systemic level change that needs to occur that requires the legislature. I know that's the long game. But is there anything that we could do right now while that process is being weighed that could move the needle? There's so many things that have been mentioned, and I'm thinking, curriculum consistency. Is it professional development? Is it a more of an emphasis on social emotional learning and wraparound services? Is it differentiation? Is it teacher autonomy? Is it strengthening the family student partnerships? It's probably all of these things, but if we were to prioritize, what could be done now in the interim to potentially move the needle?
So I don't know enough about the interaction between, for example, the council and RIDE. I see a smile or a grimace, I don't know. Because I do wonder if there would be ways to elevate teacher voice at each school and try to, but I do think, Councilman, there's a long history here, because I was at RIDE before I was even chief of staff, and we were working with Providence, and there was something called the Providence Compact. But there's a history of every side demonizing the other for decades. So, well, we can't work with this commissioner, or we can't work with that superintendent, or this union president is out of their mind, And so to me, I at one point I counted this all out, and now I can't remember, but there's been Peter McWalters, Deborah Giss, Ken Wagner, so there's been at least 4 commissioners. There's been many more superintendents. Because I was one of the longest serving since Arthur Zarella, and I was here 4 years. That's not very good. I mean, in terms of longevity. And there have been fewer union presidents. But it cannot be, I did say to someone a while ago, unless you believe every one of those people was an idiot or evil or whatever, I think we have a systemic problem. So I do think there might be ways to, increase dialogue, etc. But I think we really need to change the system so that, because I as I said earlier, my experience in Providence was there were many talented educators, and the kids are fabulous, and the families are fabulous, and we need to figure out a system that gets people to work together. And that really requires it, not just, Sue and Steve happen to be able to stand being in the same room together for hours. It needs to be a system.
If I might add, I think Sue was my 3rd superintendent, my last one, maybe 4th, I forget. There was iterations of this, to your point about what can be done.
I think that's.
It was the last, it's up, then it just becomes personality. It becomes, the union president decides to, I'll give you the perfect example, this whole high school. Melanie Johnson, superintendent, Commissioner Walters, issued an order that Hope had to change dramatically. I wasn't even part of that order. I could have just sat back and, because I was involved, I was leading the president, and by law, it was personnel, I had charge of, wages, benefits, conditions of employment. So I was in effect, my contract was gonna be, I sat down with Melody Johnson, we worked it out along with Commissioner McWalters. We changed Hope High School. I think Councilman Royce actually was a student there, was so impressed with the changes. To my point about personality. Commissioner McWalters leaves. New commissioner comes in, new superintendent comes in, they're not feeling Hope High School. Within a year, Hope went back to exactly the way it was. So without, to Sue's point and the commission's recommendations, without these fundamental changes, then it's up, then it's personality. Do I feel like working with the superintendent today? It should be a requirement. There was comments that you can't legislate collaboration, which is true. But you can legislate, as any other profession, best practice, professional standards. That you have to go in and exhibit those professional standards every day.
That includes working together.
And you know, to Sue's point about the medical field, you go into an operating room, you don't want to hear the anesthesiologist say, you know, I don't think it's gonna work out for you today, because I'm really not getting along with the surgeon. You know, we're not on the same page, we're not collaborating. That world, it only exists in education.
Yeah,
Thank
I'll just add a little bit. To the extent your question is, what can we as a city council do while the state as a takeover is not going to get it back for a couple of years? One thing is, I think that we in Providence should tell the state, we don't want you just to hand it back to us and put it bigger if we haven't done it. This is what we want you to accomplish before we hand it back. And then, and the mayor start working on this, start planning for what that transition is going to look like. And we're suggesting that this set of recommendations will accelerate the schools coming back to Providence in a better form. And it may be able to happen faster if these reforms can happen. So in terms of, it's a little frustrating right now because the state is taking it over. And you folks, you know, I want to serve on the city council. It's frustrating to see all this stuff happening. You don't have a world. I would encourage you to advocate to the state and say, you've got to do a better job before you put it back to us. And in the meantime, planning inside Providence work.
Thank you. Councilwoman Shirley Peterson.
Thank you. Not sure how to begin on this one. I guess first, thank you for all the work that was put into this. And I say this as a precursor, but please excuse my frustration. I see all of these beautiful opportunities and initiatives and things that we need to focus on. I see we need to focus on the funding and the contract negotiations. We need to build opportunity for empowerment zones and teacher autonomy and accountability and changes to state law. I see all of these things that we need to do. From a council perspective, we're always, in my opinion, in a position where, we can't do that. We can't do this. We can't do much right now. One of the things that I find in a lot of these discussions is that all of this is very much focused on the teachers, the administrators, the leaderships of schools, how to rebuild that portion. And we're never actually talking about what the immediate outcome to the child is. And one of the things that I find extremely frustrating is that these are all beautiful visions and opportunities that we can get to. However, we never hear about, well, in doing this, we can actually see that in a year from now with XYZ school, we're going to be able to see that students, and I preface this part with saying that I don't believe that we should be educating to test. But we will be able to see certain things where kids are reporting better grades or better testing or more supports to their learning and their behavioral outcomes that our public schools are consistently not having the support to do. And so I appreciate all of this, but one of the things that I'm looking for is to find out what immediate outcomes we have for our kids, because every time we have these conversations, I never hear it. I never hear about what it is that our students will see in terms of immediate impact, which is the most important piece of this conversation and is often not, it's surpassed or overlooked.
So I wanna thank you, because you're right. Thank you for asking this question, and I think, so to be completely honest, so if one of these laws changes, immediately a student will not see the change. However, if teachers really had decision-making at the school level and we're working together as a team, I think you'd see changes like the following. So your individual student would be known and discussed by a team of teachers, not just one teacher. There would be recognition that the way I learn is maybe very different from the way you learn. And we would think about, as teachers, how do we organize the school day and the classrooms and the way we work together to meet the needs of both of us and all of us. And student learning would increase as a result of that. And a teacher should be able to, because they've had the time and the benefit of their colleagues, when they meet with you as a parent and ideally joined by your child, to say, this is where your child is at, and this is the plan for, and here's the standard, or here's the grade level expectation, and here's how we're organizing the day and each successive class to bring your child to that goal. And what do you think as a parent, and how can we work together about that?
Can I follow up? So am I to assume that that is absolutely not happening at this time with our school system?
I don't know if you can assume it's absolutely not happening. I think and I do want to be going back to humility. I want to acknowledge I'm now an outsider. I used to be an insider, but now I'm an outsider. But I think looking at the results and hearing about kind of the multiple transitions of staff within schools and some out of the district, that it's not happening enough.
One last follow-up, sorry. I come from a school where the model that you are speaking of is actually very much a fluid opportunity.
Here in
Ours in Rhode Island.
Okay. That's great.
I also recognize one of the wonderful things that we have, the teaching model that you're talking about is phenomenal. Teachers get to go into different spaces. There's multiple teachers. We have classroom sizes of 8 to 1.
Wow.
Every student has the learning support system that they absolutely need. And even in that case, with all of the opportunity to discuss students in larger spaces with multiple teachers being able to give recommendations, the model takes 3 to 5 years to work. I say that, and I again ask the question, is this something where can we find something where we can see somewhat of an immediate outcome measurable that will allow us to be able to pursue this model at a larger scale in the city of Providence to be able to support our students where they need to be, where we need to meet them at. It is, I continue to ask these questions because we don't have all of the resources that you're asking of us. And the ultimate, every single time, the immediate outcome is that the kid, our student, doesn't get supported in the way that they need to be. So I appreciate all of this opportunity and this vision and this chance to do it better. But for me, I need to be able to see direct measurables that are going to allow our kids to see immediate impact as quickly as possible, because that's what they deserve. Thank you.
So I'm gonna give this a shot and acknowledge that I may do a horrible job answering all the aspects of your question, but I think so 3 to 5 years. So I think you can see some immediate changes and would see. And there are some things that will take the 3 to 5 years. But I would submit to you, we have not only done the 3 to 5 years, we've done, in many cases, decades of the same thing and not seeing the level of success. And I don't mean, I am not trying to throw any administration under the bus. I was here. I know how hard it is. But I do think you would start seeing benefit. I mean, some of this, and I can send you not very, I mean, they're not fun to read, but kind of academic papers about this that should talk about, you know, based on data around how much teachers are collaborating, how much decision-making authority they have, et cetera, the increases that we're seeing in student achievement. And it would just be completely untrue to say this is going to turn on the dime instantly. But I personally, after decades in education, I haven't seen anything, unfortunately, that turned a system on the dime.
Thank you. Councilman Sanchez?
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Senator Zeri. Thank you, Dr. Lucy and Stephen. It's always great to have you in front of us. Senator, first question is for you. You started your presentation off of stating that you would like the state takeover to succeed before local control. And like a quick paragraph, what does that look like to you? Because that's one of my really just frustrating parts of, obviously I wasn't on the council back then, but the fact that besides the 3 folks that you mentioned, it seems like everyone kind of just put their arms up in the air and was like, okay, just do it, knowing that there's not data anywhere around the country that state takeovers succeed, or if you do have any examples that you would like Providence to kind of follow or be as similar as much as possible is my first question.
Okay, so let me start saying I began as a skeptic of the takeover, and it was not what I wanted to see happen. I wanted instead to see the state help Providence more. You know, what happened was there's this Hopkins report. The Hopkins report said 90% of the system was bad and 10% was good. And I thought that was overstating the bad and understating the good. But then what the commissioner did is she took that Hopkins report and said, well, actually the Hopkins report says it's 100% bad and 0% good. So give it to us because we can't do any worse than those folks in Providence have done. And I thought that was unfair to the educators, the parents, and folks in Providence. And instead they should have been that. That didn't happen. So then what the state did is they prepared something called the turnaround action plan. And they brought in the community and they said, what's our goal for 5 years? They came up with a wonderful set of goals. And they said, at the end of 5 years, this metric would be up here, that metric would be up there, and so on. There was the pandemic and then things slowed it down, but even accounting for that, they're nowhere near what they had promised. And, that makes me sad. In my observation, the community, well, there was a fight between the city and the school district recently that you folks had to deal with last week in the claims committee, where it was, we're having this disagreement about the money, and some people in Providence would say, I'm through with this, just give it back to us right away. We don't want to start, we don't want to do it. I would like to think that we should be asking more from the state than just giving it back to us. We should be saying to them, you've got to do some things so that the structural conditions in the schools are better than they were before the takeover. And as I said, it was not my first choice to go through this route, but if we could change during the takeover, if we could change these issues of shared accountability and then gave it back to Providence, it was our commission's conclusion that the schools would then be significantly better off. It's something that Providence hasn't been able to do in the last 30 years. So, to Councilwoman Peterson's point, is that going to solve everything? No. We're very, very clear that there's much more that needs to be done. And frankly, there was a lot more the state could have done, I wish they could have done. But this would be something so that when it came back to Providence, we'd have a better chance of succeeding. So I don't know if that's sufficient answer to your question, but that's about the best I can do.
No, definitely, fair. So I guess kind of building on that, your recommendations, do you think they would be more effective or implemented better under a state takeover? Or are these even possible outside of a state takeover? I believe so, right?
So what we're proposing, and we call it removing legislative barriers. To get to what we have in Springfield. And to get to, by the way, another example they talked about was Lawrence, Massachusetts, study this. They did some things there. To get to those results, we need to remove these legislative barriers. And another point, and a couple of folks brought this up, right? That last one, the Crowley Act division, that's a little bit of a rearview mirror right now, because we're expecting the return to local control. But a couple of folks said at the commission, it's too bad. It's too bad that you didn't have a stronger Crowley Act before the takeover, because that could have inspired the folks in Providence to do what they did in Springfield. In Springfield, the state came in and they said, we're going to take it over, and you're not going to like it. I mean, you'll like what we end up with, but you're not going to like how we get there. And it inspired the stakeholders, it inspired the educators, it inspired the union, it inspired everybody. Said, we don't want to take over, we're going to do this ourselves. And thankfully, that's what Springfield accomplished. We had the whole takeover before giving Providence a chance to do this on our own. And that's unfortunate, but that's where we are. And at this point, I would encourage you to think about what can we do to make the state takeover as successful as possible before
Senator Sanchez.
Yeah, thank you. So I think a common theme that we've been hearing, and I'm sure you folks have been hearing for decades, is personalities at play, and it's important. We all have egos on this table. We all play a role in decision making, and it's important to acknowledge that. But something that's incredibly important is to create or uplift systems that aren't dependent on individuals. Do you think these changes outside of the right to education, obviously, get us to that point?
It's closer.
Mhm.
And we came to this realization, we don't know when we ended up writing the op-ed. The more we thought about it, the law really didn't encourage us to work together. it was just the opposite, so. Speaking purely politically, if you're a union leader, you're just required to negotiate wages, benefits, conditions of employment. And the easy way to avoid elections, even though they're supposed to be democratic organizations. My experience is most unions do not have elections. If you just give the appearance that you're fighting for your members, you're not required. You're not responsible for student achievement. You're not required to work with the other adults in the room. You're not required to have a working relationship that works in the best interest of your members and kids working with the superintendent. So, yeah, is this the panacea? No, but I think it will begin to set up structures by which there will be an expectation. And I think even with the state takeover, whatever your opinion is, there's an opportunity here. And the schools are coming back. So there's an opportunity to lead and say, this is where the council, although it doesn't have control of the schools, can say, this is what we believe is necessary for a successful takeover and, more importantly, return. And if you're just going to give us the schools back and you're not going to change a word of state law, is the way we set this up, and I think repeating Sue's comments about Commissioner McWalters, when he said, we're operating under state statutes that were written a century ago, specifically designed not to serve all kids. So if you're going to take the position, not you, but I think the state law shouldn't change. It's working famously for kids in Providence. Well, I think that you don't have a place to take it. I think this is a strong set of recommendations that could grow. And you could have community meetings and get community input on these recommendations. What do you think? So you're going into a room of your constituents or whatever community organizations you're going to engage. Say, this is a plan. What do you think about it? As opposed to just, what do you think? Most people, you take a poll, most people say, yeah, I'm not really happy with what's going on in Providence schools. But this is definitely a plan that gets us to where we want to be, and then it be less dependent upon personality.
President Miller?
Thanks, yeah, thanks for spending this whole Monday night with us.
You too.
So I think there's a few things. One, just changing the state law. So I think changing the state law is the starting point, right? It creates the opportunity. It doesn't create the will or the action, right? So the questions of like, yes, it's frustrating to be on the city council at a time of the state takeover. By the way, it would be frustrating to be on the city council anyway, right? Because we don't have direct voice in school matters, right? We don't have an education committee because there is a school board. When we are not under state control, that is the place that has autonomy and authority to do a lot of this conversation. But when we're talking about like, oh, what are we doing right now? Creating the political will, as Steve was just talking about, right? Like bringing the whole city into the conversation so that, if we are successful, and I think we should be and could be, in actually creating, the path for, there to be actually like mutually accountable and co-led school communities, that there's actually political will to move them in that direction. So that we stop kind of turning on a dime every time there's new leadership, and there's a much more even, right, from membership from other people in school administration, not just the superintendent, and from membership of the teachers union who are like, oh, we all have a stake in building a school community. That's how we get away from, one of the things that I do have questions about, but I'm not gonna get us into, we don't need to get into the nitty-gritty, because happily, all three of you have offered your support in us in this conversation. One of the things that's really hard to hear is the peer review panel, right? Because my understanding is that was wildly successful and was abandoned, right? And so how are we changing things structurally such that you can't abandon something that's working,
can abandon something that's working for our students, right? And to Councilman Peterson's point, I'm there 100%. If you look at the results from the empowerment zones, you do see direct, almost immediate, right? Not tomorrow immediate, but almost immediate change for students. So like the question of like, what do we do? This is where we should be. This is what we should be doing. We gotta expand this conversation like out of this room, and into our neighborhoods. And we gotta make it so that, Senator Pro Tem Paterno, former senator, you were saying at the beginning, you know, when you came into this as a parent, there was this feeling of like, oh, the community was ping pong. But I don't think it's changed,
It has,
right? I think that every single, person who spoke to us about school funding over the last 2 months feels that way. I think that we have an opportunity to end that now, right? To that as we're going back to local control, we can stop putting our students and, parents on the ping pong table, right? And we can like truly structurally change, what's happening. Sorry, that's less of a question, but, oh, I did have one question.
Good.
In terms of state law around, one of the hard things about structural change is like, a lot of it is dependent on like holding, a lot of state laws are around teacher contracts. We don't have that same, and there's lots of reasons why, around like, collaborative administrative procedures. But when we're talking about like, oh, we wanna hold, the administration accountable for cooperation, that becomes much harder when there's lack of a process to do so. So I just,
So what we have right now is rubrics published by the Department of Education about how to evaluate students. And in the report, we recommend that those rubrics be upgraded to place a higher priority on credit achievement. So that's something that can be done administratively inside. But I'll open it further.
I don't have a lot more to say on evaluation. I actually, but I do, think the state has put forward these frameworks for teachers and for administrators, and I think, not surprisingly, we all know what you're held accountable for, and you're more likely to do, so I do think that would be a start. A few of you have rightfully mentioned resources. Councilwoman Peterson, Chairman Pichardo, and then President Miller, you mentioned PAR, which I think, peer assistance and review, which I think may also go back to resources. I think part of the problem, so I completely agree with Senator Zurier that there are insufficient resources. And I do believe there are resources that could be reallocated. So, for example, Councilwoman Peterson, when you talked about the teaching model in the school you're a part of, you know, teacher contracts and education historically has been what people refer to as an egg carton model. You've got one teacher and about 25 kids. There's nothing to say if you free up a contract so that teachers and building leadership can decide how to best organize to serve their kids, that one teacher couldn't have 30 or 35 kids for something that's a lecture or more technology supported, while another teacher has much smaller groups of kids to work on more in-depth skill development. But that's really hard in a teacher's contract that talks about you get your schedule before the school year even starts. It's not supposed to change without, you know, there's just some barriers again that can be removed. There are, if you have more authority at the schools, you might need less people in the central office. And then on peer assistance and review, I wasn't, I do believe it works swimmingly. I experienced that. And it wasn't here when it was abolished. But if you're paying for a PAR system, and then you're still paying all this money on all these stages of due process, I do wonder if part of it was is the cost, you know, we can't just keep adding, we have to also reallocate.
What happened there, when it was first instituted, it was supposed to, the mentor teacher was supposed to leave the classroom for 2 years and then return to the classroom. Well, the finances worked out better, but more importantly, he was sending a message that I'm not an arm of the administration. I actually work with the union. This is a union-led program. And then what happened is they just decided, well, someone decided that you're not going to return to the classroom. That's your job. So now you've taken, let's say, 8 mentor teachers, and instead of paying a sub and then rotating back, you've created 8 new positions. Administrative, well. Ish,
Yes,
and it was viewed as that, so now we have to have cuts. Before you start cutting math teachers, or you're gonna cut the 8. So that's one of the reasons why it didn't stay.
I'll just say one thing on the issue. There are some recommendations in the report about how to reallocate current resources. And one that we heard a number of experts talk about was advanced degrees. It's great to be educated, it's great to have an advanced degree. It doesn't necessarily translate into being better able to teach the kids in class. That's an $8 million item. We could reallocate that money.
Thank you, and we'll take a couple more questions, then we'll go into public comment. Councilman Longcross.
Thank you so much. I just want to thank you for your leadership, Senator, Superintendent, Mr. Smith. And I'm trying to synthesize all this, so let me know if I have this correct, but my colleague, Councilwoman Peterson, was saying was, and as an educator, I'm sure you'd appreciate this, the backwards planning. So getting to the outcomes first and doing everything that needs to happen to achieve those outcomes. It sounds like, as I've been synthesizing this, the law is prohibitive. The dysfunction really needs to be disrupted. We need to remove those legislative barriers before we can make that significant progress that we're looking to see. Am I reading that correctly?
That's well said.
Okay, so I guess my question is, what can we do or should we do as a unified body? Of course, advocating for this legislation up at the State House is critical. But what can we do to move this along so we're unified in that effort, so that some of these things get passed? And if there was a priority list, how would we rank some of these items? Because, as you know, every single year there are many bills up at the State House that don't see the light of day and may not have a path to victory. And the more coordinated we are in our efforts to push the General Assembly, I think the more effective we can be. And I just want to preface by saying, I've been really fired up about this issue. So I've already started a petition with my constituents. I have already 500 petition signatures, people who, and in that petition, I'm basically saying, we need more state funding. We need to amend the Crowley Act. And I just want to make sure that as I'm advocating to these folks who have already signed this petition, they're ready to go. I can communicate clearly about these are the priorities. And when you see this bill up at the State House, we need you as East Side residents who have a voice, who are passionate about this issue. We need you to show up. And to the senator's point, it's going to take some serious advocacy. So what's the thing here, and how do we prioritize? And then secondly, is there anything that we can do preemptively at the local level, a local law that we can maybe enact beforehand that could compel some of the changes that we need to see, presuming that there's eventually going to be a shift back to local control to essentially mandate, or maybe not mandate, but incentivize some of the things that we're looking to see.
Well, I just say, in terms of projects, I would say, this one is a little different from payday lending, gun control, or other statewide issues. This is a Providence issue. And the representative from Cranston is going to be less concerned about legislation that affects Providence only. That's how all of this is set up. And what the General Assembly wants to know is what does Providence want? That's what we need your help. Yeah.
So the resolution obviously is to start and.
It is for all of these
Yes.
items, or is there, if we could only get one?
I would strongly advocate that you pass a resolution
Is it package?
that supports all of these and. To your point about council people connecting with their constituents, and you have the type, I was a state rep for 20 years. I never wanted to be a council person because it's too difficult. But you're having community meetings, you're vocal. And your constituents are, contacting and even better, coming to the state house and saying, yes, this is necessary for Providence schools and Providence kids. That would go long.
Councilman Sanchez.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll be quick. Just two questions, last points. The first question is, what does legally enforceable rights education look like in the real world?
So, this was, as I mentioned, I have a side gig. I don't spend all my time as a state senator. I really practice law. And, I represented a couple of school districts that argued to the state Supreme Court that there should be judicially enforceable right education. And we were looking at the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. In 1993, their Supreme Judicial Court held that their constitution had a judicially enforceable right to education. A few months later, the Massachusetts legislature enacted the Education Reform Act of 1993, which set the foundation for the Massachusetts reforms. It involved what was called a grand bargain. The state put in more resources. The stakeholders agreed to certain reforms that they weren't willing to give up other ones. And the legislators did that because they were in fact saying, we're not just doing this because we think it's popular. We're doing this because we have to, because the Constitution requires us. They turned the legislature from just elected officials or politicians, if you will, into statesmen and statesmen. That was my dream. Unfortunately, we were unable to persuade the Supreme Court to do that. I wish that we could give the voters confidence to make that decision, because I think a lot of voters would say, we don't have a right to education? Of course we do. And then vote overwhelmingly say yes. Unfortunately, right now, we can't get it through the House of Representatives. And as a result, then I tried with the Constitutional Convention. That was very unpopular. So now we're going.
Thank you. Thank you. And I do want to just make sure that this kind of record, Senator, that I at least read all of your newsletters, and especially around this, and definitely appreciate and always forward them to constituents that are interested in education. My last question / point, and I'm like really making an emphasis to make it a point when I'm talking to Providence related folks when speaking about education, especially with what has transpired the last month or so, is regarding charter school expansion in the city of Providence. It's something that isn't being talked about, and I'll say we have a governor, a mayor, a commissioner, leadership at PDPSD that I'm not going to put on record that they're pro charter, but they're very friendly to charter school expansion. And I don't want to get into the conversation of charter schools being bad or good. That's for each family and parent to decide what's best for their children. But as is under the current funding formula, charter school expansion directly impacts the Providence Public School budget. That's just a fact, not an opinion. That's pretty clear cut. And the fact that we don't have at least like publicly available plan or vision on what the state would like to see. There's no cap like Massachusetts. A report at Ascension Falls has them the next decade almost at 50–60% charter school. And until we somehow figure out a different way to fund or make sure that doesn't necessarily impact the private school budget, we're gonna keep running into an issue of sufficient funding, in my opinion, the more that we don't at least have a report plan on what charter school expansion looks like here in the city of Providence.
Let me second the motion. I'm actually going to depart slightly from President Billy's wise observation that elected officials should be cautious about getting involved in school policy when we have a school board. This issue involving achievement first came up when I was on the city. And we saw exactly the dangers you described. We prepared reports about the harm that would come to the Providence Public Schools from the opening and expansion of Achievement First. And we brought those reports to the Rhode Island Department of Education, but unfortunately they did not agree with us. And it was a little complicated by the fact that Achievement First was a mayoral academy, and the mayor of Providence liked Achievement First. So that was an issue. But I might add that the Providence Teachers Union has been concerned about this because they don't think they can compete fairly with the public schools, the way that they're set up. And I'll hand the floor over to Steve, but we think actually some of these reforms could improve the ability of the Providence public schools to compete with the charters. And it might help to mitigate, some of the erosion that's been harmful for the city district. I'll leave that over to Steve.
No, I think to be clear, that was one of my major motivations for the direction I chose as president. It wasn't purely altruistic. When I took office, I think there was something that I had over maybe 2,100 teachers and don't hold me to over 26,000 students. I think you're probably around 1,700, 1,600 teachers, and I think you're below 20,000. So, and as a state legislature and a union advocate, I opposed a lot of child legislation. But the fact is that, I came to the realization it's here. I have to compete. When you run for office, most people have a competitive nature to them. So I'm one of those people. So the contract we were negotiating in 2014, we actually had this, the basis was to create child-like authority at every school. So, what's the best parts of child? They can make these decisions, they're nimble, meet the needs of students where they're at. And downside 797 and put that money into the schools to support. You just can't give them decision-making authority without a budget that they really have control over. So yeah, I really believe that that's that these recommendations will create a foundation, especially when you're talking about governance at the school. That's essential.
I actually supported charters as superintendent in both districts I was in. And the reason was, I didn't think we were changing our system fast enough. To Councilwoman Peterson's point about how many years, I'm not saying we were supporting charters, I have no idea where you are on that. But wealthy parents have school choice all the time. Because they can pay tuition, whether it's Moses Brown or Wheeler or somewhere else. And families who do not have those means are in a sense held captive by a public school system that may or may not be serving their kids well, and that troubled me deeply. At the same time, I feel very strongly that charter schools and traditional public should be on a level playing field, and that's not always the case. And I read the Central Falls report, the recent one, and I think some of the charts in there, or at least the draft I saw, did show that there are some population differences between the students being served in the charters and the Central Falls school system. And I think that needs to be much better understood. And it was troubling to me that in that report, they said they were unable to get data on particularly Central Falls kids and how they were doing at the given charter. They were just getting the global charter school data. And I think it's really important to be comparing apples to apples all the time. And I think all charter schools, but I might be wrong, they don't take kids in the middle of the year. Or, you know, in the traditional public system, if a student immigrates, we need to take the student, as we should. I'm not saying we shouldn't. If a student leaves juvenile justice, they come back to school, as they should. But I think I think there needs to be much clearer data and dialogue around what are some of these differences and how are they contributing to better student achievement at some of these places. So that was a complicated answer, but I am troubled. I think we have to make these types of changes to really start changing the public schools, because I also do not believe charters are the answer, because I do not believe there's ever going to be a point where charters are serving every child. And we need a quality school for every child.
And with that said, I would say that even going through that process of allowing or passing legislation to allow charter schools, many in the community felt that was an answer, because if we didn't have any type of choice, where would our communities of color be at this point, right? And but time has passed, and now we're seeing the predictors that were highlighted back 20 years ago. And here we are, and it's impacting the education system, and that's why now, to answer the question in terms of what we're doing, is creating that political will. And knowing the legislative process here, we can pass resolution and even ordinance. The General Assembly is so complicated, even though the question is directly, what does Providence want? Legislation has to pass on both sides, and the political will has to come from us, but also deliver it to the leadership in the House and the Senate, on every level with the puzzle. This is just one. Then the other, I mean, it's complicated. We may, some of us, we may see it, the effects, but this could actually, to be implemented, even with these recommendations, maybe one or two, or one of these pieces of legislation will take effect in 2027, right? When we get to see it. So with that said, thank you very much for the presentation and the dialogue. We will continue to have more input from the community and get out the wording out there in terms of engaging within our ward, and also us. We understand that the governance in the school district, we don't have a lot of say, just like the school board, now that they also gonna have the hybrid, still as an advisory capacity. I think that the state, right, or the Commissioner Enrique Infante, now has opportunities to go up to the state or work with us to state the case along with us to share and bring the plan, what we want for Providence. One of the questions I wanted to just, if you don't have the answers, fine, but my understanding is that the contract, teacher's contract, right, is coming up. And this doesn't address it. But what are recommendations now that the RIDE can take to make immediate impact, as it was stated earlier? You have any say?
Yeah, on the report,
Yeah.
we point out the Springfield contract.
Mm,
We say, look at that contract, look at how things have gone in Springfield. Please consider those reforms, and not all of them are permitted under current state law. That's why we have a section about removing legislative barriers.
yeah.
But there is a lot that we can do under the current state law to make our labor management relationship look more like Springfield than it does today.
Thank you very much. Well, thank you. Any further comments? Again, thank you very much for,
Are you taking any public comment?
yes, just for them in essence. If you, Senator, would you like to make any closing comments, and then we'll hear from the public and we'll.
No, we're so grateful for your time. on this issue. Certainly, if you have any follow-up questions.
Certainly will. Thank you very much. And I know that having the commission at the state level takes also a lot of hours. And we really appreciate this. And it's a timely report. We will, we have the resolution before us, and we will continue that discussion. And hopefully, once you get back to the General Assembly, we'll have a nice clean one for you. Supporting the efforts that you have put forward. So thank you, and thank those who came before you and provided this information.
And it's okay to stay and listen.
Yes,
Okay,
absolutely.
great.
We actually just have one person that's signed up to speak. And this is the time that we want to hear from the public. I have Elijah McLean.
Yeah.
Elijah will introduce himself. He's a familiar face around here and in education too, so welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, council members, and gentlemen for having me. My name is Elijah McLean. I had the absolute pleasure of interning with the city council last year during my graduate studies at Brown, where I was an urban education policy fellow. I prioritized the PPSD school district return to local control because I'm a alum of PPSD. I grew up in the Elmhurst, kind of Smithville area. I went to Nathaniel Green, and I had a phenomenal experience there. Then I had the privilege of going to LaSalle Academy, going to debates for my undergrad, and primarily studying education and leadership and policy. Currently now I work at the United Way of Rhode Island as our manager of government relations and policy. So I'm not here as a formal capacity in that space, but I just want to give you an insight that I do work in policy and government relations. Just wanted to quickly share and reinforce the importance of the recommendations that you've heard about today. I was a part of the research team that, heavily studied the commission and followed, also Senator Zurier's mailing lists and email reports because it's vital. It's important. I think the most unique part of this is that takeovers happen across the country for the same reasons. Lack of academic performance per se, fiscal constraints or mismanagement of funds per se, and a lot of them happen in Black and brown communities, very similar to Providence. That has never changed. Ironically and uniquely though, what happens after the takeover, what happens in that receivership or return to local control fluctuates and differs. And so I think, the report that you all seen that's coming from Springfield that recommends the school empowerment zones is rooted in data. And it's rooted in actual people who were on the ground and saw that takeover intervention not be as successful as intended. Then took that opportunity to, revitalize the supports in that community and leverage the power and the strength in their teacher and their, academic community there. And I've had the pleasure again of researching and collaborating with Dr. Morell, for example, who wrote Takeover, and literally defines this to a T verbatim as what happens in districts, and Providence was no different. Of course, giving all valid effort to the folks who orchestrated the tap, the folks at RIDE who were doing their very best. I just wanted to acknowledge and reinforce that in my capacity at United Way, I have the absolute privilege of working with several nonprofit partners who are very engaged with the city council members, for example, our PPD Equity Fund. or in our community impact fund, where we get to work with nonprofits directly. And in my portfolio, I get to work with the education serving nonprofits. And their number one concern right now is their youth, is the students who want to be active and play a role in these conversations, who have actually been made aware of some of these recommendations and, hold them highly in regard. One, because it's a plan that is viable, that they can see that there's tangible measures to it, and frankly, that there's a level of community engagement that they feel comfortable with. So, from a research perspective, I saw the value and quite frankly fixated on the takeover because I was fortunate enough to go to college, to come back and study and want to get back to the community. So I definitely understand that there's this, burning desire from a lot of our community members to have a role in this conversation. And I think the traditional, standard of the takeover doesn't really allow for that. So to reinforce Steve's point and, Senator Zuri's point around the community engagement is really valuable here. And so from a research perspective, it was a lot of fun, it was challenging, but I also saw the value in what other communities that are much larger than Providence, that are much larger and have, I think, a more difficult circumstance with relationships and egos and everything, and just a shared volume of students that is very different, do this at a team and are successful. And again, the immediate results, I think, are environment shifts, are leadership shifts in the school capacity. And you're actually, providing some professional measures and standards for teachers that typically may not have that opportunity. As an educator, I definitely led from the front, definitely was spoke up and vocal, but oftentimes it was challenging to make those recommendations or changes happen in your classroom, yet alone at your school. So, I just really want to reinforce that the emphasis on teacher accountability, teacher relationship building, and then finally allowing teachers to address the concerns that they see in their classroom, is really relevant. And I think it creates this wonderful ecosystem for community members to play a role in their school, because it's not as streamlined from the top down. So, and I would humbly again, reinforce the recommendations that encourage community partner engagement, encourage utilizing the nonprofit partners like United Way, to help broker some of those community conversations. You guys definitely have a tremendous opportunity in this new hybrid school board model too, to engage with community members differently in the past. Not saying that the school board doesn't do that very well, but when you go to school board meetings, they're not very productive when the community members have it. So I think the city council is definitely the best vehicle to have those conversations and provides a very strong community force that I think would be very difficult to dismantle at the state level, like even considering General Assembly members who are not Providence delegation members. So I just want to really reinforce the work that Steve and team have done already, that I worked very tirelessly to do. And, realizing that the takeover happens across the country in very similar circumstances, and rarely do districts do the same thing that got them into that position. So it would not be wise, I think, to go back to a traditional model, but to consider something, that along these lines that allow for teacher professionalism, community input. Yeah, so.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Appreciate it.
you, thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. And absolutely to the members, before we adjourn, we're gonna have also Miguel Youngs come up with a few words. And to the point of for us to continue this conversation, as we had a previous meeting, we had city year here. And also, these are the conversations that we were talking about, getting out in the community, bringing in PLE, bringing in Cycle, bringing in different organizations to hear their voice and along with the teachers union and teachers to the table, because it is important that we come prepared to listen and to hear what they have to say. I come from that space where for many years, as a parent, as I said earlier, and as a legislator, I see it when people get ignored or at least not being heard. So, Miguel,
Thank you very much, Chair. I know it's a little unusual for maybe the staff to come up here and speak. I just
introduce yourself, please.
Miguel Youngs, I actually work for the Providence City Council staff. I'm the director of policy. It's a little unusual, I think, for staff to come up here. I just wanted to take this opportunity to impress upon the councilors here how much work the office and the staff. Well, I think Elijah said earlier, in terms of like time period. I can tell you that since I've worked here, this is probably like one of the longest parking projects. It's been a very long conversation. And I don't think Elijah mentioned this, he is interning with us and working on this as well. And over that time, we've accrued a lot of resources, a lot of information. It's truly like a growing pile. And my coworkers can attest that I have a pile of papers behind me. And a lot of it, and this is all from that. So if you ever have any questions, if you want to talk about it, work on this, we have many resources. Steve is with us. We spent a lot of time talking with Senator Zurier. I just really want to impress how much information there is to talk about on this and to really utilize the staff if you started that. So thank you. Impressive.
Thank you very much, and yes, we do appreciate all the work that you've done and the staff. Today's also been a very long meeting, but this is the kind of meetings that we signed up to do, especially on education. Tonight, we are fortunate that we only have one speaker coming from the community, but we're gonna get out to the community and encourage others when we have our meetings here to hear from different organizations and parents and youth. I know that we have a list of organizations that our own members are providing, so that way we get to hear from them. And then, with that said, I also want to just highlight that the mayor, Mayor Smiley, is gonna have that community conversation on education, which we often participate. Most of us put it on the calendar as this December 14th at the Juanita Sanchez Educational Center. And that's, I believe, at 5:30. No, yeah, and actually, we'll check on the.
I think it's at 12 on Saturday.
12.
Is it 12? No, 12.
No, at 12.
At 12, yes, on the Saturday, on the 14th. So December 14th at 12 noon at the Juanita Sanchez Education Center.
We'll confirm with the record.
Councilman Sanchez.
Thank you, Chairman. I just want to,
Make a motion to.
thank you. Can I just also remind folks of, it should be in our calendars, our school's PVD is a student-led coalition that will be having a conversation about the future of Providence Public Schools tomorrow at 4 o'clock at the Elmore Community Center from 4 to 6:30.
That's right, in Ward 9.
Ward 9. Motion,
We're going to motion to entertain a motion to continue the resolution.
We cannot make any motion on that, resolution.
No, so we would have to reintroduce it again.
Yes.
All right. So we'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
so moved.
Motion has been made, second. All those in favor? Unanimous. We adjourn.